first panelist is Jim DeArmey. Jim DeArmey began a career in libraries in 1974 as a shelver at the Catonsville Branch of the Baltimore County Public Library. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Towson University and began working as a librarian in Baltimore County in 1980. After earning a Master of Library Science degree in 1986 at Drexel University, he continued as a librarian and electronic resources manager at the Baltimore and Howard County Libraries. He retired in 2016 from the position of Information Services Department Manager and Webmaster from the Baltimore County Public Library. After that, he served on the Board of Directors of Citizens for Maryland Libraries. Recently, he left the board and continues by serving as the Executive Director of Citizens for Maryland Libraries. Next, we have Lindsay Inge Carpenter. She is the head of research education and librarian for Anthropology, Linguistics, and Second Language Acquisition at the University of Maryland Libraries. She coordinates research skills workshops and events for campus scholars and provides reference assistance to students, staff, and faculty. Lindsay is also a co-director of the University of Maryland Libraries Research and Teaching Fellowship, a teacher training program to prepare students for careers in academic librarianship. She is currently a doctoral candidate in the Higher Education, Student Affairs, and International Education Policy program at the University of Maryland College of Education. Is Allison Jennings Roche. She is the Associate Director of Digital Initiatives and Collections at the University of Baltimore, a PhD candidate in Information Studies at the University of Maryland, and a 2024 Library Journal Mover and Shaker. Rhetoric, ethics, and advocacy for libraries as public institutions, especially as it relates to censorship and anti-democratic movements. Her work has been published in Library Quarterly, The Political Librarian, and the Journal of Intellectual Freedom and Privacy. Allison is a sought-after speaker, teacher, and advocate for libraries, and she's always thrilled to get the opportunity to support her public library colleagues. She lives in Baltimore City with her husband and their 4 children, and a house full of pets and half-finished craft projects. Rosie Stewart, a skilled grassroots organizer with a passion for youth, LGBTQ+ advocacy, and championing the freedom to read. Rosie Stewart has extensive experience working at the federal, state, and local levels on issues including appropriations, intellectual freedom, and voting access. She is currently the Senior Public Policy Manager at Penguin Random House. Rosie holds a Master of Public Policy degree from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government and is also a graduate of the University of Texas, San Antonio. She is based out of Washington, D.C., but is originally from San Antonio, Texas. And Dr. Erin Watley is a teacher and facilitator whose work focuses on highlighting accessible ways to disrupt systems of oppression, encouraging intercultural dialogue, evaluating popular media, and practicing community building. Dr. Watley is an associate professor and department chair in the Communication and Cinema Department at McDaniel College. She is also the owner of Intersect Consulting, LLC, through which she provides DEIJ workshops, cultural sensitivity readings, and media curation for organizations outside of academia. Okay, and so we have a list of a few questions. Of course, if you watched the movie, I came up with like 27 more, but we'll just go through the questions, and we'll keep it kind of casual, just to open up a discussion, and then hopefully we'll have time for some audience questions as well. Alright, so the first question, just very generally opening it up, like what were your thoughts on the documentary? Anything that surprised you or powerful?
Well, I have notes here. I took notes to bring to the end. I think the documentary covered most of what I have to say, so I thought it was really brilliantly put together. The one big question I had in this was, where were the boys? It was all women. So go get it, women. Anybody else have a comment?
I have the same. Yeah, I had the same observation.
Okay.
If you remember, yeah.
Oh, yes, do, please.
So I think I was really emotionally affected by the documentary. Did anybody else find that?
Oh,
Because I think it was inspiring and I felt inspired by it, but it's not a feel-good story by any means that our kids are having to do this and put themselves on the line in this way. So that was just my first reaction. But I think the question also had to do with how this reflects with what we see out there.
Yeah, are there any similarities or differences that you noticed with what's going on locally, in Carroll County or across Maryland?
Yeah, so I actually probably have the least Maryland experience of anyone here, so I'll hand that off to y'all. But I was just going to say that something that was interesting to me was that this documentary mainly focused on the fight happening at the school board level, where it certainly is, but it's also at the state legislature. They talk about it a little bit at the end, where now rather than going for elected positions and that kind of thing, they're trying to put these policies in in departments of education, places where it doesn't necessarily create the same paper trail, you don't have the same process. So that is just to say that this is a really complicated issue, and it's starting to move underground a little bit. So we're just going to have to keep getting more creative and vigilant in the ways that we track it and fight back.
Yeah, I would echo everything you just said. I would also say I was pleasantly surprised with the focus on policy making and the national scale of these threats in the documentary, because I find a lot of the conversations that are happening nowadays tend to focus on the students, right? And they're going to make this better, or we're going to get grassroots organizing. And I think that is what everyone in this room can do, but we can't lose sight of the larger battle, right? They're moving what we call the Overton window, what's acceptable things to do and say. So while many of their aims might be moving a little bit more underground, there is this long-term goal of changing commonly accepted terms, right? Language is the only thing that influences law fundamentally. Law is just about interpreting language. So as they start to shift what's more and more acceptable or unacceptable, that's going to eventually influence federal policy, right? There could be test cases going before a Supreme Court. That's not reactionary or an extreme response on my end. That's very much what we're seeing. So it's very much about staying vigilant and understanding the systemic and national scale of what's happening here with these threats, and not hoping that our children can save us from what's coming. And I'm from Carroll County, and I graduated from Carroll County Public Schools, so I learned all the Facebook conversations about what's happening here. And so one thing that I appreciated about the film, to the point that both of you are making, is that people involved in organizations like Bachelor of Liberty are not dumb. That they are part of a broader strategic plan to change policy, even if on the individual level somebody might be motivated by fear or anger or trust or something like that. It's part of a broader plan. And to not underestimate the power of that collective action being harnessed by Bachelor of Liberty. Okay, thank you. So in our local community, some of the people and groups that have been spearheading some of this book banning and censorship, there are certain talking points that we see get brought up and repeated, especially in the face of opposition to the book banning and censorship. And so I'm going to point out a couple of them and to see how you might respond. One of the talking points is regarding the school books being removed from school shelves. They say, yes, we're taking books out of the schools, but it's not a ban because you can still get the books from the public library, or you can still buy them from a bookstore or go online and order them off of Amazon. So it's not actually a ban. When people encounter those kinds of talking points, how should they respond, or how would you respond? I feel like something else gets what additional things, it's like, it's not a blind band. It's not a bad thing on plans, even though now teachers can't display any kind of flag in their classroom because some are displaying pride flag. And I just wanted to highlight Carroll's point about like the insidiousness of language that multiple liberty is also harnessing. They play like these weird word games about, oh man, even though that's what it is.
I went to school of thought that we need to facilitate and get better at having conversations that are outside of talking points. So in the face of talking points, I found it really valuable, I've done classes on conflict and dialogue, that sort of thing. I find it really valuable to move past the talking point of, it's not a tit for tat, right? It's not a, I'm going to prove my point about, this isn't a band, right? It's actually, it's about something bigger. I don't need to have that back and forth because you get stuck in a circle, right? It's a very circular thing that takes place, especially because we've seen a lot of these conversations play out over and over again, right? People have their set responses. I'm very much more a fan of getting into what brings you to this conversation, right? Like, why is this something that you feel the need to restrict for others, right? Or calling attention to the fact that, they even brought it up here in the film of how come the rules are being applied to some books and not other books, right? Can we look at that differentiation and can you explain to me what that actually is? And not just what it is in a big picture, but what is that for you on an individual basis? Because so much of this is not only policy, right? A part of this is in order to get the ground underneath, in order to move something, you have to have you have to actually have the will of the people to have a different kind of conversation, right? Part of that is relationship building, right? So part of this is stepping outside of the, I'm going to have a set response. It's more like, what about you brings you into this conversation? I'm really curious about that starts to humanize folks and it opens up to a different type of conversation. And then you can talk more and more about book bands. I mean, my other friends on the panel here can probably say more eloquent things about the specific responses, but I just like to, I don't want to deal on this playing field of talking points. I want to actually have a more humanizing conversation because I find that that's what's actually not happening. And that's what leads to the out of context conversations happening about these books or about individuals. And so I want to get back into the human part.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I was going to say something really snarky about that, but...
I could have gone last, but
that's probably better. But I think your point about like grounding it in your experiences and trying to relate to someone on a human level is a really good one. But I would also say that, in response to them saying you can get this book at the public library, not if they have anything to do with it. Challenges in public libraries increased by 90% last year. And you can buy the book. Okay, so kids whose parents can afford a $20 picture book should get the whole world, while kids who rely on the public school library should get one perspective. I mean, what kind of classist thing is that to say? And I think just the other thing that was touched on in the film, and I think is really important, you're talking about it being part of this like larger movement, and that is a movement to destroy public education. And that's what we need to understand. It's not a coincidence that Oklahoma is passing you have to teach the 10 Commandments in class at the same time as Texas is fighting for charter vouchers, at the same time as the attacks on books and curriculum. It's all part of it to destroy public education. And so that is scary, but at the same time, it gives us a lot of allies in the fight. So that's what I'm always trying to preach, is that the librarians, the teachers, the students, the parents, we have an opportunity now to all stand together. So it's scary to think of that bigger picture, but it's also, I think, inspiring.
Yeah, I would just like to kind of add on that I don't actually think it's about destroying public education. I think it's about destroying all of the public sphere, right? There's ultimately, we can trace these dark money donors and things like that. They don't believe in public libraries, period, right? How do you get public libraries shut down? You go after these social issues. You pass laws that make librarians quit their jobs, fear for their lives. Like, I agree with everything my lovely panelists are saying, but it's also fundamentally, there is this kind of unholy alliance between social regressives and people who are seeking to dismantle any kind of public funding, right? So they're coming together to collaborate to instill fear. 17 states in the past 2 years have passed laws making it a felony for librarians to do their jobs, right? We're not quite there yet in Maryland, but we could be any day. So thinking about it in terms of that larger sphere and absolutely humanize to your friends, to your relatives. Sometimes I'll hear, scholars, librarians, we're nerds, we want to get the data, we want to go point by point. One, I think we need to not lose sight of the fact that what kind of conversation are we having and in front of whom? Do you want vulnerable people in your communities to hear you open up the door to? No, actually that perspective should be here, because then you're going to have the response. And then that response, many people in your community don't need to hear. We don't need to have that conversation. You can shut it down because you're just opening that door. And I lost my final thought there entirely. Oh, no, it came back. Now it was late for me. My dear friend, who is a plumber, right, in one of the reddest parts of Baltimore County, has the best response I've ever seen. He just goes to his friends who go, oh, did you hear these librarians are groomers? And he goes, Gloria? That librarian? Like, really? And then we'll talk about one other ones. Well, where? And then it's just this it's to that humanizing, right? When you have that opportunity with your friends and relatives, take that. But when it comes to the political sphere, don't take them seriously, don't give them a platform, and don't give them the opportunity to respond, because that opens up a conversation that no one needs to be subjected to most of the time.
Thank you, last for holding the microphone, so you'll have to be the first one to the next question. But I just want to echo one point that you made, that removing books is just the start of this from schools. It's just the beginning of a greater, larger campaign. And the longer we wait to stop this from happening, the harder it's going to be to stop this from happening.
Great. Go on to the next question. For people who are energized, ready to take action to fight book bans and censorship, get organized, what do you recommend they do? Where should they start? And are there groups or people that they could look to in Maryland or elsewhere for inspiration?
I was lucky for me, I'm still holding the microphone. I am, as I mentioned, or has been mentioned, the Executive Director of Citizens for Maryland Libraries. And we do work to advocate for positive funding for libraries, advocate for positive legislation for libraries of all types, and for intellectual freedom. Those are our three pillars, if you would say. And I think it's important for people to band together, to find other people of same viewpoint, same interest, and then come together with a unified voice. And so you might, on your way out, just happen to find some flyers for Citizens for Maryland Libraries out there. Membership is a low $25 a year, but all in all, I think that's really the case, is to find people of like minds and then talk to them and find out more about the issues like we're finding out here, where I think I've learned more from these people here tonight than I expected to learn. And I think it's really important for us to be better educated so that we can argue more sensibly and speak with more authority and confidence. I went to the Maryland Association of School Library Association conference this year, and Nikki Giovanni spoke. And she's talked about how many people who are activists, as we heard in this documentary, didn't become activists. They just, it was kind of thrust upon them. And God knows that happened to me. I expected to be a retired librarian playing at home with my jewelry crafts and stuff. And all of a sudden, here I am. But she said some people have given up a lot in order to make things better. And you have to be prepared to give up some. Take a stand and speak out. Because if you're in a group of people who are not of like mind, it doesn't help not to speak out. I hope that sounded intelligent.
Two quick things. One, if you attended this event, you probably already know who you're voting for the school board. Opinions on what grants and about educational censorship more generally. And then the second piece of that, we can inform yourself about national trends. Penn America, who's director, was interviewed in the documentary. They are a fabulous resource. They refer to legislation that restricts curriculum, instructional materials as educational gag orders, and they track nationwide. So if it's introduced, if it's been approved, if it's been rejected. They also look at data about what types of books are being banned, where are they being banned, who's bringing forward challenges. There's an association with Moms for Liberty. And another thing that I find helpful about that website is that they talk about the theme of self-censorship as a sort of chilling effect, as this side effect, I guess, of these educational gag orders. And I think that actually, if you're an educator in Carroll County, that's probably one of the ways that this is impacting you as well, because I've heard stories from people that you might have administrators asking you, like, let's not make this an issue, just remove this from your classroom. If you have it, before it gets banned, before it gets challenged, I don't want that headache. If you are an administrator, you're in a position of privilege and power where you can help support your faculty, push back against those things. If you're an educator, you might not feel like you have that power. One thing that you can do to create a paper trail, which if you requested via FOIA, is to, in writing, follow up any formal conversations with administrators or with parents where they're directing you to remove something from your room that isn't actually a policy, so that there is a record available, and if some person wants to file a PIA request, they can then get a record of that. So, administrators tend to not like paper trails. If they're trying to avoid that headache, they don't usually like having to create that. So you might actually be able to keep that material in your classroom for longer than they would actually do initially. All good advice, and I'm sure there will be much more. A couple of key tips that I found that I think might be less common are think about who your communities are, right? Even if you're an educator or you're a librarian and you're afraid of losing your job for doing this thing through the context of your job, you're also a private citizen. So can you engage perhaps with a faith community? I have done a lot of speaking and organizing with faith communities around the past couple of years, right? It's not just the reactionary right that has, social, religious, and cultural communities to draw upon. So find those friends, get them to help you organize, vote, run for a school board thing, show up to the meetings. I saw in the documentary, I love that they showed everyone showing up in white. They didn't call it out, but that's effective to visually signal everyone's on one side, right? You can pick a color. So just think about who you can move with and stay in community with those people, even if you don't necessarily feel like you can do it within the context of your job. And then another thing is think about sign those petitions. As long as, it's every library or Penn America or any of those kinds of things, those trusted organizations, those are key, because that's how Moms for Liberty gets people out. They have banks of people's addresses. So as soon as there's potential legislation or a school board, they'll email everyone in an area and say, go, show up, show how powerful we are. So the main way that these other organizations are able to develop data sets on who to contact and say, hey, you in Carroll County are under threat right now, we need our supporters out, is actually through petitions, which is a thing that sometimes gets obscured in the signing process.
Yeah, everybody said things that I was going to say too. But I would say also think about those professional communities that you're a part of, like those state library associations, state teacher associations, parent associations, those kinds of things. I think since this really took off, there have been a lot of people just running around trying to figure out, okay, now we'll do this, we'll do that. But I have seen personally, and I don't know if you all would agree, I have seen a little bit of organization and order come into this fight. And so I think you're going to be seeing more pro-freedom to read legislation. In the documentary, it talked about Illinois' law, but it did not talk about Maryland. With Delegate Dana Jones, who was the author of that, who is a great champion for the freedom to read. She's looking to come back to that law, to strengthen it, to rein in rogue library boards and that kind of thing. So watch for that in the next legislative session. But yeah, those legislative fights will be happening, and I think that there is some movement. As you said, it's not just a political issue, but on the political/policy side, there is some movement. So I would just say, watch for that. Maryland, I know it's coming soon, and then also in your local community.
I don't have anything particularly more substantive to say than everybody else on the panel. I'll just reiterate, I really love the slogan that they gave that was on their shirts and that they set out at the conference, right, that free people read freely, right? And to that end, I just wanted to give a general reminder that freedom is a constant struggle, right? Like that this need to advocate, to be a part of the community, to link up with others and form coalitions is a part of our democratic experience, right? And there have always been laws that come from a legacy, right, of people where it was illegal at a point in time to read, right? So remembering that fact, right, and thinking about this legislation coming through that we're talking about today, right, it's like people have always had to find a way to resist, right? So find a way to resist where it is that you're at with all of these very specific suggestions that have been given. And then if I were to give one more humanizing suggestion, right? If you're in Carroll County, Democracy Labs over at Carroll Community College, they do a great job with facilitating cross the aisle conversations, as well as Braver Angels, which has a chapter here in Carroll County, which does the same thing, right? So if you're wanting to connect with people of different perspectives, those are two organizations specifically that facilitate that. But finding a way to get involved and to resist and to push back where you can, because that is a part of what maintains what we're hopefully trying to build and progressing forward.
And by the way, just to add on to that, because that's brilliant, this is not going to be a struggle that ends once, let's say, Moms for Liberty doesn't exist. Because our goal isn't to stop book banning, our goal is to have curriculums and public libraries that are reflective of the real history and of people's experiences. So that's a movement that we need to build no matter what. That's like the positive mission moving forward. I'm not opposed, I don't wake up every morning opposed to Moms for Liberty, sometimes. But, we have to keep that positive mission in our brains, and like, how do we, this issue touches so many different communities in so many different ways. So, how do I, as a member of the LGBTQ community, stand up for the Black community in my neighborhood? How do we stand with each other? Because that's the way that we're going to build this in the long term.
Thank you. That is all. Thank you. If anyone in the audience has a question, we'll hold the microphone up to you.
Yeah, right, it's late.
Okay, so I'm going to break the rules. I appreciate everybody up there being very impartial, but I'm going to add one more way you can get involved. and that is come see the Democratic headquarters at 51 East Main Street in Westminster. But my question is, I saw something tonight that I never realized. Moms for Liberty has a 501c3 designation. How in the name of do they qualify for a 501c3? And is anybody trying to fight that from that standpoint, what they're doing?
So that's actually probably a little bit of a technical, like political question. Like they're probably directing certain activities of theirs through the 501c3 and then paying for others through the 501c4. 501c3s can do education, and you can get a lot in through that. You could do more than you think. So.
Next question,
That is the answer, and I would also like to point out and add, because I'm an academic and I can say this is a right-wing movement, it's not a partisan movement, it's not a nonpartisan movement. There was a recent poll in the Washington Post last week that said 43% of Republicans are comfortable putting librarians in jail. 43% of Republicans, Washington Post. This is mainstream news, right? Like this is not a reactionary, those of us just talking about this. This is a far-right movement that is permeating even the more moderate, mainstream right, our friends and neighbors that we wouldn't expect this. It is moving rapidly to capture the Republican Party, and we should be really honest and clear-eyed about that.
Do you have any personal experiences with any topics?
Do you mean book bans?
Any of them that we're talking about?
So I'll just share going to Carroll County Public Schools and having a very privileged experience that I didn't realize kind of how privileged it was. Being able to read books from my public library, school public library, was like one of the only things that made me realize that there were people like me and there were a lot of people not like me. Both of those things were very powerful for me. And I would share, this was many years ago, so things are better now. But I took a class on American politics in high school in Carroll County, where I was the only girl in the class. And the teacher allowed boys in the class to tell me, go make them a sandwich. Yeah, call me, sodomistic slurs, and it's all game, it's all funny. And so, and again, that's within the context of a much, a broader context of being very privileged schooling experience. So I can only imagine for other kids in Carroll County Public Schools, how would be that much, that climate. I do operate from a place of privilege now. I am an academic, I live in the city, well, a lot of those things are great. But I grew up very, very poor, white, working class. My family was devastated by the recession, has not recovered, right? I'm the only member of my generation in my family out of all my cousins that is doing better than their parents are doing. I was also the first person in my family to go to college. A lot of that is set up to say that this far-right movement has captured almost my entire family, right? Every day I am told by my family members that everything is wrong with America, and that, all of these things. So it's hard to stay in community, right? That's not to make it about me, but it is to say that, even those of us up here doing this are also facing it every day in our lives in various ways. I do think, it's intellectually useful for me to be able to humanize people that have been so manipulated by these dark money forces, by these national forces, right? It's never acceptable to hurt people, but to see hurt people, right? A lot of these people who are being mobilized are being driven by fear, by anxiety for their children, for whatever, right? Not the people that come Moms for Liberty, that's not at all what I'm talking about. But your everyday neighbors, right? There is space to keep that relationship and that humanization, because that's the only way we're going to be able to pull back and move forward positively. If we're at the point that 43% of Republicans are willing to put librarians in jail, that's pretty far gone in terms of a lot of members of our communities that we need to start pulling back and finding ways to stay in dialogue. And it's hard, and it's going to continue to be hard. I don't think it's getting better overnight, no matter what happens in November.
Any other questions?
Well, and I was just going to say, just to finish that, I'm sure we all have experiences with this, but you know, coming from the perspective of being a trans woman, I know that if I had had books when I was a kid that could have told me about my experience, that I probably would have saved a lot of time and a lot of loneliness and a lot of heartache. And so that's the other reason that I do this work and stay energized in it, is because there are kids growing up that way right now. And the books exist now, and they didn't back in the 90s. So, I mean, they, you know, they deserve that. They shouldn't have to go through that.
Okay, so this is kind of going to go off with the right-wing question. Where is a two-part question? Do you see this threat to democracy on books and everything as a long-term threat for the next few decades, or do you think it will turn into something that will evolve into another niche market that the right wing will try to fight, try to go against? Because there's so many things I see, there's so many things I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years ever since we've been involved in where you wouldn't think the right wing has sunk in their closet and tried to influence things, but they have. Where do you see this? Do you see another movement coming that is kind of shadowed by this threat on the libraries, on the threat on books? Because, like, as an example, in the last 2 years during COVID, I saw grades. I don't know if 11. I don't know. It was mostly students, people my age, where I saw a big wave of men's rights online, changing my friends into these people I don't even recognize. Do you see, like, this is going on tangent, but do you see that? Do you see, as academics, do you see, can you tell me or tell us, like, what the next thing will be?
I think that there's an issue going on in our country right now where people, I'll go with, let's pick me, older white people, are seeing that we have to share our privilege with others. And people who have that privilege are rallying against that for fear that there won't be enough. And if those other people are going to take this away from us, and I think there's that mentality of non-abundance, limited resources, that we can't let other people get what we have. And that's why I see some of those movements, like the strong men's movements and that kind of thing coming up, is because people don't want to lose the privileges that they view as a right, when in fact, they just locked into that.
I'm sure you have lovely things to say, both of you, but I would also like to point out that this is a long-term movement, right? This is happening since at least the 1950s and the 1960s, right? They're playing the long game, and we've been taking them at the word and not seeing the subversive long game. It also happens to go to this zero-sum mentality, right? Other people getting rights doesn't mean you have less. I think one of the best things, if you're interested in reading kind of the theory behind why this is happening, is called The Propagandist Playbook by Francesca Tripati, and she talks a lot about the mentalities of these communities and what's driving them. I do think bookman's attacks on libraries are just the latest front in this larger reactionary social movement. I don't exactly know where or how it's going to mutate next, but what it's going to do is fundamentally change our understanding of what these institutions mean, much in the same way like the men's rights activists. Some of those frameworks have kind of permeated normal society in a really pernicious way. So we have to keep our eyes out for how that's kind of leading into everyday life and things become normalized.
I was sad. You said exactly, basically what I was saying. It appears it's a growing issue and problem, and it will transform into whatever it needs to be in order to maintain the progression of gaining and hoarding power, right? Like that's what this is a story. It's a story of gaining and hoarding power. And one thing that I can't predict what the next iteration of it will be, but I do think that we have, there's a real concern with, especially I've noticed this in young people, with a unwillingness to even want to discern good information from bad information, right? Like just kind of opting out of, I just don't want to think about it, right? I just won't worry about it. I'm just going to live my life and like not even bother with things that are going on. And I think we're continuing, like with book bans, with anything related to withholding the fullness of a story or information or experience or representation for anybody, that keeps people from being able to engage in what is actually real and true. And I think people should be encouraged to come back to practicing critical thinking, right? Practicing being able to hear something and balance it and compare it with another set of beliefs, because I do fear that young people, and really just people in general, this is not just young people, it's because I teach young people, but people are not discerning anymore. And that is a big concern for me, and it only seems to be growing with our interaction with media in the way that we do.
That question about sort of like what's on the horizon, like what's in the future, I think that's a really great question to, do we have one more question? One more question. Yes. One more question.
I have a comment that question. So, I was Carroll County Public Schools librarian. There are a few of us here today. This is obviously an issue that has impacted us for over a year and a half now. I came here having not seen this, expecting to be angry, but I didn't expect to get emotional like I did in certain parts, because it's watching what we're going through right now. It's hard to do that. It's been exhausting. I know somebody mentioned that the advocacy work can be very tiring. I know a lot of us are dealing with that right now. My question is, we've kind of subversively talked with one another. We've reached out to a variety of organizations. I know I've spoken with some of you in virtual meetings over the past year and a half, and we talked to our union representatives, and we talked to one another. We talked to Jake Webmaster, and you guys are here presenting this, and we, first of all, can't thank you all enough for that. My question is, how do we bring all that together? Because it feels like it's been 10 years instead of a year and a half, and I'm hoping calling God that Mary and Amanda get in on November 5th and this all just disappears, but I don't know how to get the pieces connected. Like, how do you all talk to one another, and how can we talk to you all to fix this, in our county at least?
Also, Catherine did not say this, but she is actually the Maryland School Librarian of the Year.
I was just going to say, if this makes you feel better, and it might not, okay? The right wing is not nearly as organized as we give them credit for either. And they would probably say, damn it, those librarians are just so organized, they all speak in the same, you know, so to some degree I would just say it's all made up of people, and what you're doing and what you all are doing and the fight that's going on here is contributing, you know, and so I wouldn't look at it as we have to figure this thing out. So you're doing the work, so thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say almost exactly that, right? What you're speaking to is grassroots organizing. It's how social change has happened in American society at any given time. We look back and we're like, oh, it's this one movement. No movement was one movement. It was swings and surges of various groups of people jumping in and jumping out, and that's okay. Maybe you can't sustain the fight next week, but you can get back in 2 weeks after that, right? And that's how these things go. That's why you bring people in, and you find ways to support that community, whatever that community is, right? You're gonna have each other's backs, bring people meals, check in on them, whatever that is, because that is just as fundamental to this kind of grassroots organizing as showing up to the school boards. And unfortunately, like, there's never been a moment in history that we just came together and said, yay, social justice, let's all get right into. We have an organization and we got this ready to go, right? Like, this is just kind of how it happens. This is how we, like, change the world. It's these little bits and pieces and this human engagement. Okay, so Ms. Carpenter, I would love to talk to you after this. But one of the things I was thinking of in connection also with the men's rights question, one of the challenges I found when I was preparing for today is seeing like what was the most recent news about what's happening with the Board of Education and that everything's paywall from like the Baltimore Sun. There's not a local paper anymore. It's called Baltimore Sun. This is not to say that it shouldn't support journalism through subscriptions, but stuff like men's rights propaganda is freely available anywhere. So one thing that I have been thinking about is platforms regularly tracking what's happening locally and making it publicly available, because I know some of that conversation is happening in like private groups. So there's not one place where people could go and think, okay, this is what the demand, this is the EIA request people have filed, here's what information we have, here's what summary of the latest Board of Education. I think there's a way to formalize that information collection that's already happening and making it publicly accessible. That might be a step towards kind of recruiting more people to the grassroots movement.
Thank you for the excellent questions, and thank you so much